Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees.
In the winter of 1955, a woman bravely refused to give up her bus seat to a white man in an event that we all know as the turning point of the civil rights movement. Nearly 75 years earlier, on a train bound to Illinois, 22-year-old Ida B. Wells refused to give up her first-class train seat to move to the Jim Crow car. When one man couldn't move her, 3 more came, and while she was eventually removed, she left behind a bitten conductor and an all-white train car applauding. Unbeknownst to her, this would be the beginning of a life of leadership, the birth of an outspoken voice for civil rights, which fought lynching and segregation and supported women's rights. This is the story of a woman's leadership in a fight for justice, which left behind a legacy of standing social change, that spurred the co-creation of various movements and organizations which brought forth these changes. A few of these organizations include the NAACP, the Alpha Suffrage Club, and the very first anti-lynching organization in the world, the London Anti-Lynching Committee. Wells was born in 1862 in Holly Springs, Mississippi. 6 months later, the Emancipation Proclamation was released, bringing a contagious atmosphere of new hope for her people. While her childhood was at times bleak, Wells was raised in this environment of hope and strength. Wells lost her parents and an infant sibling to the yellow fever outbreak of 1878, when she was just 16. While she was told she could fend for herself, she was forced to watch as members of the community decided on the fate of her siblings. She calmly announced that she was going to take care of her siblings herself, with the assistance of her grandmother and a friend of the family. Pretending to be 18, she presented and passed the teaching exam and became a teacher at just 16. She continued to care for her family and attend college through her teens and early 20s. Nevertheless, what happened on the train to Memphis changed her. She had never experienced such humiliation, and she had not been raised to let such injustice go unnoticed. She faced the train company in court and earned a $500 settlement, only to have it later overturned by the Supreme Court. This further provoked her want for change.
What inspired Wells to take action? On the first part, she was raised in a home where action was something that was expected and modeled by her family. Her parents were very strong advocates for themselves and for their community and for their families. Wells's father, Jim Wells, for example, was willing to go against his employer's wishes and vote for the candidates that he wanted to vote for as opposed to the ones that his employer wanted him to vote for. Refused to go against his conscience politically. When Ida Wells was a young woman in her formative years, she had these strong examples growing up of what it meant to take responsibility.
With little money, few resources, and a seemingly small position in society, Wells' hope for an equal America didn't seem like a realistic idea, but she used an unexpected weapon to fight for this hope: her words. Many times under the pseudonym Iola, Wells recounted the many horrors which she witnessed firsthand in the South. She began writing editorials for the New York Age, the Indianapolis Freeman, and the Chicago Conservator. Then, in 1889, she acquired a third-part interest in Free Speech and Headlight. Later she published pamphlets like Southern Horrors and A Red Record. One fateful night, 3 of Wells' good friends, who were the owners of a successful business, were captured, dragged through the city, and lynched by the white, less successful owners of a rivaling grocery store. Wells responded in anger and dismay, publishing an infuriated editorial. While she was out of town, a white mob stormed the office of this free speech, destroying the press and leaving a threatening note. Realizing the danger for all blacks in Memphis, in a different newspaper she urged blacks to make a decision: to leave their homes or unite against white dominance. They did both. The African American community put so much trust in her word that they left Memphis by the thousands, and those who stayed boycotted white businesses.
You know, this is that black migration to the Middle West, the Kansas and Oklahoma migration. Go to Kansas, go to Oklahoma. And many blacks left. And I think that's another reason that the power structure was angry with her, because she understood the economic and political strategy that they were using to intimidate blacks. And what she was saying is, you don't have to stay here and be intimidated, leave.
Wells was also an outspoken feminist. More than likely, taking charge of her younger brothers and sisters as the head of the family must have aided her independent spirit. Meanwhile, the news about a growing practice of mob violence spread abroad and caught the attention of social reformers Catherine Impey and Isabel Mayo. Impey, who had met Ida B. Wells while attending a meeting in Philadelphia, proposed to Mayo that they invite Wells to travel to England in order to promote the anti-lynching campaign there. Wells' pamphlet, Southern Horrors, had already been published in London in 1892 under the name U.S. Atrocities, and she immediately recognized the potential such a trip had for furthering her cause. So, on April 5, 1893, Wells left for Europe. She began her lecture tour in England and Scotland, returning again in March of 1894. During her second tour of 5 months, she spoke on more than 100 occasions, receiving considerable press coverage in English papers. On her last evening in England, friends and supporters gathered at Tavistock Place to form an English anti-lynching committee. Among those who joined were the Duke of Argyll, Lady Stevenson, and almost 20 members of Parliament. The writings of Ida B. Wells on the subject of lynching and racial injustice are a well-documented and researched body of work. They mix journalism and social analysis. Her first works, Southern Horrors and A Red Record, show a detailed account of statistics and social dynamics behind lynchings that have endured for more than 100 years. When she continued documenting crimes and influencing the many who read her papers, it was no surprise that she made many enemies along the way. But to the surprise of some, those against her were not only white supremacists, but some African Americans who were high in society and feared losing their place above others. Her words were so powerful that even 105 years later, they move a nation into a position of apology.
The United States Senate today takes up a rare resolution expressing remorse. The Senate is apologizing not for something it did, but for something it failed to do. It never approved a law against lynching. To say that the resolution comes late in the day is an understatement. When the anti-lynching activist Ida B. Wells wrote that the silence and seeming condonation grow more marked as the years go by, it was in January of 1900.
The apology really struck a nerve, I think, across the country. It certainly did in Waco, Texas. When that resolution happened at a national level, our local CRC came to the council, met to, as a city council, as a mayor and a city council, and the city staff, that we would do everything going forward to make certain nothing so horrific as that event would ever happen in the city of Waco.
As an unexpected leader of a war with words, the legacy of Ida B. Wells is one whose impact we can hardly measure today. She was a radical voice in a time that rejected the radical, a female voice when only male voices were heard. American philosopher Cornel West describes her.
What did Ida B. Wells do? She looked American terrorism in the face. She looked lynching in the face. She was run out of Tennessee, a bounty on her head, and then went to England. She was willing to speak truths at the cost of life. And you see, Du Bois at the time, Booker T. Washington at the time, they did not want to speak as candidly and ended up not speaking as courageously as Ida B. Wells Barnett. That's why I conclude she is the most courageous in the sense of looking that terror in the face and being willing to be crushed by it. Ida B. Wells deserves to be talked about in the same breath as Martin, Malcolm, Frederick Douglass.
Ida B. Wells planted her legacy around the globe and has inspired change from past, present, and I hope through this documentary, future leaders.